Garry Kasparov is one of the best chess players of all time who became the world champion after defeating Anatoly Karpov in 1985. Being the #1 player for more than 20 years while achieving a peak rating of 2856, almost nobody could defeat Kasparov at his peak. But what happens when Garry Kasparov faces an extremely strong chess streamer? This is Ray Enigma, whose identity and real chess rating are a total mystery. After previously achieving a draw with Garry's biggest rival Anatoly Karpov, Ray was ready for his next challenger. But for Garry, he knew that losing to a chess personality like Ray could destroy his entire reputation. And upon starting the game, Ray opens with d4, which Garry swiftly responds to with knight f6, perhaps considering playing his famous King's Indian defense. But after knight f3 and d4, the game turns into a symmetrical variation of the queen's pawn opening. After bishop f5, Ray has the option to trade the light square bishops and damage black's pawn structure, but in exchange, it would heavily weaken the e4 square. So instead, he immediately castles and decides to keep the pieces on the board. Ray plays knight to d2, protecting his vulnerable e4 square, while Garry responds with knight d7, protecting any infiltration via the e5 square. And after Ray plays queen e2, Garry plants his knight on e4, where it will dominate the white's position. Ray plays b3, which makes Garry raise his eyebrows. And then a few more moves are played until Ray finally makes the first capture with bishop taking e4. Unfortunately, this was a big mistake. Not wanting to play a retreating move like knight to e1, Ray decides to put his knight on e5, forcing more trades, even at the expense of one of his own pawns. White plays knight to c4, kicking away black's queen and threatening to jump into d6. Then Garry lashes out with b5, essentially forcing white to play knight to d6. After rook d8, white has no option but to trade his knight for black's bishop. Then queen h5 was played by Ray, looking to cause some trouble for black's king. After queen e5, we finally see white's plan, which is to play queen g5 and set up some mating ideas with the h-pawn. A pair of rooks are traded, and the backwards d5 pawn becomes a potential weakness for black. h6 kicks out the queen, and rook c8 puts pressure on white's queenside pawns. Ray has no option but to go back with his queen to protect the c2 pawn. Garry defends the b5 pawn by playing a6, to which Ray responds with rook d4. Garry responds by finding the best move in the position, f4, breaking down white's pawn chain. After the pawns are traded, Garry jumps in with queen g3, attacking the undefended h4 pawn. However, this was a huge mistake, as after h5, white's battery on the d-file is too strong, and black will be losing a pawn. After shaking his head, Garry decides to play rook d8, hoping Ray would take the pawn on d5, leaving the e3 pawn unprotected. There is only one move that would bring white back into the game, and that is rook taking e4, as capturing the rook would allow Ray to take black's rook with a check. Unfortunately, low on time, Ray plays c4 and is once again in big trouble. After the capture of pawns, Garry plays rook b8 with a nasty back rank threat. Ray plays queen c1, hoping to prevent black's infiltration of the first rank. However, that does not stop Garry from still playing rook b1, forcing Ray to capture the rook, which after the queen takes e3 is a devastating fork. White decides to give a check on b8 and then attacks the f7 pawn, but that allows Garry to create two connected passed pawns, which are incredibly powerful in an endgame. Then Garry plays queen d6, ready to start pushing his pawns to victory. Ray has only one hope: to somehow force a perpetual check, which would result in another draw against the former world champion. With queen f5, Ray slams the clock with only a few seconds left. But the checks soon end, and black starts pushing his pawn. White manages to win Garry's a5 pawn, but black's pawns are just too quick. After pawn to e2, Ray's only move is to move his queen to the first rank. This is when Garry starts pushing his other pawn. White tries to push his only passed pawn, but it's too late. Garry doesn't even capture the pawn but plays d2, ready to make another queen. Ray gives a check and prepares to make his own queen. However, after both players make a queen, the black king is completely safe, and another queen is on its way. With no good moves available, Ray's clock runs out. Before he could even resign, the players shake hands as the mysterious chess streamer is finally defeated, keeping Garry as the final boss of chess.